Силовое сдерживание России воспринимается нами в качестве прямой и непосредственной угрозы национальной безопасности, снять которую как раз и призваны юридические соглашения на основе внесенных нами проектов.
One of the reasons Russia cited to justify its military operation in Ukraine was the enlargement of NATO, and Vladimir Putin has demanded a firm guarantee that Ukraine will never join the alliance. But what if Ukraine was part of NATO? Would its membership prevent Russian aggression? We'll answer these and other questions on the future of Ukraine's membership in NATO. One of NATO's guiding principles is Article 5 of the Washington Treaty from 1949 on collective defense, meaning that an attack against one ally is considered an attack against all allies. They, in turn, would take action they deem necessary to assist the attacked member state. This principle binds members together, committing them to protect one another, and it remains at the heart of the alliance.
The reasons why the countries wanted to join, say 30 years ago, they're exactly the same today. I mean, if one looks at Sweden and Finland, I mean, let's think about it. Countries who have, military neutrality, if you like, policy for many years. In case of Sweden, 200 years. Members of the European Union, which even Ukraine is not. So there are various, security pledges, etc., solidarity clauses, etc. But nevertheless, when faced with the most acute, the most dramatic, in the case of Ukraine, it's essentially existential threat to its security. Countries hedge their bets in a very simple way. Any calculation would show that with all the imperfections, there's nothing perfect in the world, there's no perfect guarantee either. But simply put, NATO is the best security policy, insurance policy in the world. There is no better one, as simple as that. And if one says, well, how do you know? Well, there is a simple fact that since its inception, 1949, not a single NATO country has been attacked by another state. We're talking, of course, about, let's say, more traditional forms of military attack, because, we're talking about hybrid attacks. They actually happen every day as we speak. The only case, by the way, when NATO has activated Article 5 was 2001, and that was a terrorist attack. So yes, it was an attack, in this case the United States, but this was not a state per se. I mean, Afghanistan was used as a terrorist base and all the rest of it. And that is extremely important. Of course, it's impossible to state with 100% certainty because, of course, we're also dealing with the country, in this case Russia, which is governed by people who are progressively more and more irrational in the way they approach the world, how they see the world and their goals, etc. So one cannot rule anything out. But if we're speaking about sort of rational, logical analysis of the veracity of the credibility of the security guarantees offered by NATO, by the organization now with Sweden joining, comprising of 32 countries, the military capacity, the economic capacity, the political unity and all the rest of it, well, then it is pretty, I think, fair to say, to observe that if Ukraine had been a member of NATO, say in 2014, the first invasion, and certainly in 2022, there's a pretty strong chance that it would not have been attacked. It's as simple as that. So at least my answer to that question is, with a few caveats, yes.
The July NATO summit will most likely not bring on a breakthrough for Ukraine's membership. This has been confirmed by high-ranking US and UK officials.
Yet there is, of course, a group of countries, that includes Poland, who believe very strongly that there should be a kind of a breakthrough. But reality is what it is. Now, that does not mean that, therefore, that's it. The game is over. No, it's not a game, of course. It's a very, very serious business. In my humble view, the case for Ukrainian membership, both from the point of view, obviously, of Ukraine's own interests, but also from the point of view of the interest of the alliance, is even stronger today than it was before. Ukrainians have shown, this is an opinion of military experts, that they are more or less 3 times more efficient when it comes to conducting the many operations than the Russians. That's a big thing, bearing in mind the disproportions which exist. Secondly, the losses that the Russians have suffered are enormous. And they are the aggressor state, and there is no denying of the fact that Ukrainians are de facto fighting the battles which are defending our security, our freedom. If they were to be invited, would become ultimately member, the sooner the better. That would improve, obviously, Ukrainian security and the NATO security. But all these buts, because it's a unique situation, it's the war going on, suggests that right now that is not possible. Every type of work that it's kind of expected from an aspiring country, which officially Ukraine is helpful, because nothing that NATO is asking will be detrimental to Ukraine. Again, fight corruption, make sure that you really have a stable political system. We'll see, finally, Ukraine will have to have elections, which of course are difficult at the time. Work on the issue of standardization. Don't be shy in asking actually for advice, which is also of fundamental importance for the conduct of operations. Ukrainians have shown to be creative. They not only brave, but at the same time, it's true that there's still a lot of expertise that resides with many countries. I think Ukraine will be well advised to kind of, it's inevitable that frustration is there, and that is perfectly understandable. But, frustration is a bad advisor. You have to focus on what is possible, make the maximum use of what is available, what is politically possible, because that's the way NATO works.
NATO membership is open to any European state. Currently, 3 partner countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Ukraine, have declared their aspirations to NATO membership. It's a journey through formal procedures and reaching standards, but looking back at the road of other countries, there are important lessons that could support Ukraine in their current journey.
First, you need to obviously gain acceptance for the very idea, and which was not the case, for example, in Ukraine. That has changed quite dramatically, of course, after 2013. And now I think there is no question whatsoever that Ukrainians en masse, as a society is very important. But you also need unity when it comes to the way you approach it. It is true that a country that is aspiring to join, it's absolutely fundamental that it's not only actually enjoying this unity, but it's able to display it. The second point is, and I think here Ukraine gets it, if you like, it's their own, you need to rely to the maximum extent on your own capabilities. It's again fundamental, in this case we're talking about Ukraine, that there are all different levels of and levers of government. People have to sing from the same song sheet. There are some trade-offs you have to make. I mean, on one hand, you have to recruit people to, unfortunately, send them to the front line. On the other hand, you need the industry, which needs to be defended as well, also in terms of infrastructure, to function. But the key is that you cannot have people displaying different kind of, attitudes to that, because that's, you still need to convince the others, and others are looking precisely for that degree of unity, but also the ability to rely on your own to the maximum extent. Countries join NATO and countries remain in NATO under a solid level of support in all the current member states. Because, of course, they want to enjoy the benefits. Article 5, the fact that you can rely on your allies to come to your assistance, that you can kind of spread the burden, etc. But that does not take away the responsibility of any country, in the first place, for its own security, for the stability of its political system. For instance, various political standards, the rule of law. Fighting corruption, for example, and things like that. They are not military interoperability issues, but they matter a lot. And that is a kind of, a task which requires organic work. In the case of Ukraine, they still have to display that ability during the war, so it makes it harder. But this is indispensable as well. That is certainly one of the lessons with that. The third issue I would mention is the question of cooperation with other countries, particularly in the region. Now, on one level, it's there, where we talk about Baltic countries, about Poland, Czech Republic, or even Finland and Sweden. I think these are one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine in a variety of ways. But it's also fair to say there are certain tensions over issues not necessarily related to NATO, agricultural issues. It's important to address them. This is the expectation from NATO, and that was actually codified in so-called Study on NATO Enlargement in 1995. And the reason is very simple. NATO does not want to import any kind of tensions, unresolved issues between the neighbors. And the most well-known issue is the question of relations between Greece and Turkey. I think NATO has been successful in this respect, but nevertheless, it is the right of the member states not to wish to kind of add to the tension. So that is something which should be taken seriously by any candidates, including Ukraine, and different aspects of this. The fourth issue is the question of being active, both in terms of obviously stating your case and if you like, lobbying, but also in terms of making the maximum use of available platforms, cooperation, instruments. Some of it is actually pretty mundane, some of it is not terribly exciting, but you know, this is what NATO is also, it's comitology. We can see it today, for example, very recent decision to establish a special joint center, so-called, educational training, lessons learned center. That is exactly the way to go, because you can do a lot of things. And by the way, whenever you get, this is also something which is sometimes forgotten, whenever you get advice from NATO officials, let's call them more experts, civilian or military, you get it for free, and it's actually devoid of any kind of national bias. Whatever you can get from NATO, and there are different formats of this, is kind of priceless. And all those, as I said, sometimes boring committees on, standardization, on, language skills, on ethics, logistics, they matter, because in the end, first, they give you an opportunity to align yourself with the required standards, and secondly, they just make you, in their own right, they make you more capable. So that's certainly one of the lessons that a country like Poland would be happy to share with Ukraine.
In 2019, French President Emmanuel Macron, in an interview for The Economist, warned European countries that they can no longer rely on America to defend NATO allies. What we are currently experiencing is the brain death of NATO, he said. This criticism was directed at the United States and then President Donald Trump, when NATO forces unexpectedly withdraw troops from northeastern Syria in September 2019. Macron faced criticism for his remarks, but it did bring forward an important issue for the alliance.
France is a very respective ally, and French contribution to NATO is very strong. But the most important thing is what do they do, particularly if they're decision makers. And I think that today the shape of NATO is good, but that's the good part of the story. The other part, of course, is that NATO is facing enormous challenges because of the security situation, the war in Ukraine, because there are various, sometimes one could say irresponsible statements made, for example, by one of the leading candidates for the President of the United States. Let's call it what it is, saying in public that, one is not sure whether Article 5 would apply to all the members. That's not really helpful, to put it mildly. So these are serious issues. We've seen it before. NATO has faced various crises, and it's always come out with them, in a good shape. Not everything that NATO has done always ended perfectly, like the exit from Afghanistan. That does not mean the operation did not make sense and so on. But in the end, the principle is simple. NATO is what we make of this, and that is the responsibility of all the member states.
NATO is an intergovernmental organization, which means that its performance is the result of the workings of all its member states. It's a body that's able to adapt to a changing environment. The key to its success is not just determination to execute what was agreed upon. The alliance requires discussion and sometimes even arguments, but it's the attitude of solidarity that persists through all the difficulties NATO has faced.
It's perhaps the most important link which makes NATO such an attractive, security organization. And if one looks back, why was NATO successful during the Cold War when the challenges were very, very substantial? Because the Allies showed solidarity. And that solidarity, of course, took the form of, sending troops. Let's not forget, huge number of American allied troops were stationed in Germany, which was the main flank. But also that solidarity was shown in the amount of defense spending. The so-called frontier states at the time spent a lot of money. Again, Germany, I think, spent over 4% at the time. But the other countries who are, let's say, further away from the front lines, for example, countries, in the southern part of Europe and so on, they also spent well over 3%. Now, that is the situation that we would like to see today, which is not yet the case. even though we know 2014 decision was made in 10 years' time, and that time has come now. All the countries should spend at least 2%. So apart from all the other important political, military security policy considerations, there is no getting away from the fact that the best way to actually prove that you walk the walk, the peace dividend is finished, it's eaten away. We are dealing with a predator state. This has to have consequences, including when it comes to the actual defense spending. And that perhaps is one of the best ways to test how the words, declarations match the reality, because so many other things can then flow. I believe solidarity is there, it's real, but it can be even stronger, and that is frankly the expectations of the countries that join NATO. They have the right to expect that other countries who were at the time inviting them actually all fulfill the pledges that they made, and that's perhaps the biggest challenge and the most important task in front of NATO today.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, take a look at our other conversations on the topic of NATO, defense, and security.